Hello. Today's video is going to focus on a theme-based question. As you know, in the exam, the AQA exam, you've got a choice of two questions. You can either answer the character-orientated one, or you can go with the theme-based question. Now, over the years, the kind of themes that have bubbled up in these exam papers are things like gender, responsibility, tension, contrasts, society. Now, the good news is, and you might say this goes without saying, but English, it's not like maths. You know, there's more than just one acceptable answer to an exam question. I mean, you're walking home with your mate after the maths exam, and he says to you, "What do you get for the last question?" And you say, "Well, I got 62,846. Why? What do you get?" And he says, 12. You know, clearly, one of you is wrong there. It doesn't work like that in English. In theory, two students responding to the same question can write completely different things, focus on different ideas, different quotations, and yet they can both still toddle into the sunset with that A star in their back pocket. And that's quite a liberating thing to realise. That's quite an empowering thing to know. Now, this is the theme we're going to look at in today's video, and frankly, if this one pops up in the exam, I'll be tap dancing, because social class, how does Priestley present ideas about social class in an Inspector Calls? Social class is probably the key idea or theme of the play. I mean, you could write 10 essays on this. How the social classes interact, you know, how certain social classes have opinions about other classes, their opinions about their own class. Look at Priestley's message, you know, we need to look out for everyone regardless of class. The corruption and self-interest at the top of the tier in the ruling class, the exploitation of the working class, and of course Mrs. Burling's toxic prejudices towards the working class. Now, you'll have to forgive the cheesy pun, though I dare say if you've watched a few of my videos you're used to it by now, but that is a first class question. We'll whip through this quickly because I dare say you've seen it before. In the AQA exam, you've got 45 minutes to answer on an Inspector Calls. There's that choice of two questions, you only answer one. And personally speaking, I get my students to plan for 15 minutes, write for 25 minutes, and then tooth combing at the end to check for errors. That takes about 5 minutes. Now, the thing that distinguishes those A grade, those A star responses is being able to analyse language in your response, looking at the effects of Priestley's language. What's he trying to say or do or show with the words that he uses? The other key feature of an A star, A grade response is ones that look at the themes or ideas or messages that Priestley is trying to present to the audience. Now, perhaps that's easier in a theme-based question. It's embedded into the question, isn't it? The theme of social class in this case. And the final point to make is to ensure that you are task focused, you are answering the question that's set. Don't be tempted to just blurt out everything you know that's insightful and intriguing about this text. The things that you're putting down have to eventually, ultimately, loop back to that question. Once I've opened up that exam booklet and I'm looking down the barrel of that exam question, my next task is to identify the key words of the question. Here's our question. How does Priestley present ideas about social class in an Inspector Calls? And I've locked in on how, present, and that kind of main bit, the key word, can I call it that? The key idea, ideas about social class. How could refer to the language techniques Priestley's using, the structural techniques. It might also refer to dialogue or stage directions, perhaps even things the characters do or have done to them. Present basically means show to the audience. How does Priestley show to the audience ideas about social class? Occasionally they might substitute the word present for explore, depict, convey. No need to freak out. It all means the same thing. How does Priestley show this to the audience? How does Priestley put forward this to the audience? And as for the key words, ideas about social class, more of that in a moment. Ta-da! A plan so beautiful it could make a grown man weep salt tears of joy. Now, luckily for you, yours doesn't have to be anywhere near as presentable as mine is. I've done mine like this just to make it clear for you what I'm doing. If yours looks like something the dog coughed up, that's fine, just as long as you do have a plan. Because if you don't, you are snookered. You need to take that time to organise your thoughts, to get some rough ideas down. That's going to make writing this exam response infinitely simpler. You may not be able to see things too clearly on this plan at the moment. Don't worry, I'm going to go into close-ups. But what you can see is an awful lot of arrows coming off my four main arrows, my four main points. And I call this stretching the arrow or developing my point. I'm always trying, when I'm planning a response, when I'm looking at a point in response to a question, I'm always trying to stretch the arrow and develop my ideas based around that point. This is the way of securing those highest grades. Something I've done for your benefit here, I wouldn't bother doing this in an exam, I've kind of colour-coded where I've analysed language. I think that's the things with red blobs next to them, and the yellow blobs relate to where I've looked at Priestley's themes or messages. You'll remember what I said earlier, analysing language and addressing the themes that Priestley's trying to get out there. Those are two ways of ensuring you're reaching for those stars, reaching for those A's and A stars. And here's a close-up of my first point, my first planned point in response to that question: how does Priestley present ideas about social class in Inspector Calls? I'm going to kick off by talking about how the bourgeoisie, the middle class, or the ruling class, seem to be conditioned to exploit the poor. And I've thrown in a quotation of Mr. Burling's, "Eve wants a pay rise, I refused, of course." I've then locked on the significance of course, and I've also considered the effect of having that couched in a short sentence. It only remains then to breathe some life into those haggard old notes. Next stop, A Starsville. There's the little beauty. I'll do my normal pack drill at this point, folks. I'll read the paragraph through and then I'll explain, I'll deconstruct what makes it an A-star standard piece of writing. Don't forget, of course, this is a response to a question on social class. As representatives of the bourgeoisie, the Burlings appear to be conditioned to exploit the proletariat. On the subject of Eva's pay rise, Mr. Burling states, "I refused, of course." The use of the term "of course" implies it is a natural act for Burling to place profit and self-interest before the needs of others. Moreover, the use of a short, simple sentence here conveys the idea that such a refusal requires no further explanation. It is simply the bourgeois way. Let's direct our attention now to the stuff in bold. This is going to give us that deep insight into A-star writing. Representatives of the bourgeoisie, that's a very high-level term, isn't it? That the Burlings kind of symbolise or a cipher for the middle class. And again, I just think the bourgeoisie sounds a bit spiffier, a bit more A-star than the middle class. Conditioned, high-level word there, almost like they're programmed to exploit or abuse the proletariat. Exploit, a high-level term for taking advantage of, and proletariat, a high-level term for the working class. Where it says, Mr. Burling states, "I refused, of course," what I've done here is embedded my quotation. I've taken the key quote from the play, "I refused, of course," and just woven it into my own sentence, creating a sense of fluency that the examiner appreciates. I've locked in on the term "of course." Examiners love it when you're deconstructing and zooming in on key bits of language, and implies is a great springboard or way to start that explanation. So of course implies that it's natural for Burling to act like this and put money and self-interest before others. Moreover, that's a connective that tells the examiner I'm going deeper, I'm analysing something else in response to the evidence. I suppose what I'm doing here is I'm going beyond analysing language and saying this phrase has this effect. I'm now evaluating language. I'm saying, well, this language, this bit of evidence has this effect, but it's also got this one too. And that is the index, that's the mark, that is the measure of an A-star piece of writing. And I've talked about here, I've gone back into that evidence and I've mentioned the fact that it's a short sentence. And this conveys the idea that it's simply the bourgeois way. A simple sentence to reflect a simple rule that these people live by. Here's another point from my plan that I've zoomed into. This is my point in response to that question on social class, that Eva is sinned against by the Burlings and that they are representatives of the ruling class. And again, you'll see how I've stretched the arrow and I've developed that idea, and I've not forgotten to analyse language too. The next step then is to take that plan and pump it up into an A-star paragraph. And I apologise if my cheesy jokes and cheesy cartoons are leaving you feeling a little deflated. Yeah, I see what you've done there, Mr. Taylor. Deflated. Very good, very good. I tell you, you are bursting with talent. I've done it again. Here we are again. We've turned that plan into a paragraph. This time I'll read it through, but perhaps if you want to pause this at your leisure, you can consider why I've put certain bits in bold there. What am I doing in those bold bits that's conforming to kind of like the rules of an A-star paragraph? Now this is a bit of a big, hairy, Godzilla-sized paragraph, so I've broken it up into two and slapped it on two separate slides. Priestley comments on the ruling class through the way the Burlings sin against Eva. Ciphers for the ruling class. The Burlings' biblical sins include Eric's lust, Sheila's envy, and Mr. Burling's greed. This is to emphasise Priestley's idea that capitalism is essentially corrupt or immoral. Exploiting the poor appears to go against God. And here, as promised, is that second paragraph, responding to the same point. Eva is a symbol for the poorest tier of society, the proletariat. This is implied through her surname, Smith. As it is a common surname, it infers that she represents the common man or the working class. Moreover, her switch to the name Daisy Renton is significant because the word rent has connotations of blah blah blah, and you can have a look at my plan and see perhaps how I might finish that off. By all means, feel free to have a punt yourself. So, let's wrap this up. Take out the shaky cartoons, the shakier jokes, and what have you got? This is a video that focuses on theme-based exam questions, in this case the theme of social class. When you get that question, you want to identify the keywords that'll explain and clarify what it is you have to do, and you need to make sure you're analysing language and the effects of language in order to ensure that A-star. Also, make sure that you're weaving keywords for your exam question into your paragraphs. That way nobody can accuse you of going off task. You're focusing explicitly on that exam question. And that's your lot, we've made it. The theme of social class in an inspector calls responded to A-star specifications. Job's a good one.